Hello, true duelists. It's YGO Strat's Yu-Gi-Oh! Single card history, where I'm going to be talking about some of the cards that have impacted Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout the years, and some of the other ones that didn't. Today's card, the once $200 secret rare, and a menace of the Dragon Ruler format, Mecha Phantom Beast, Dracossack. Dracossack was first released in Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy as a secret rare in 2013, and the same set that gave the game the Dragon Rulers, because subtlety is not part of Konami's MO. Notable reprints to date include the secret rare printing from the 2014 Megatins and, wow, the year 2014, a super rare print in Infinity Chasers in 2019, and a rare print in Maximum Gold in 2020. As of this video, it spent no time on the ban list. A rank 7 wind attribute machine type Xyz monster with 2600 attack and 2200 defense. The materials to summon it are any 2 level 7 monsters, and its effect reads: once per turn, you can detach one material from this card to special summon 2 Mecha Phantom Beast tokens, machine wind types that are level 3 with 0 attack and defense. While you control a token, this card cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects. Once per turn, you contribute 1 Mecha Phantom Beast monster, then target 1 card on the field. Destroy that target. This card cannot attack during the turn you activate this effect. Dracossack is actually a card I've covered in the past, all the way back in 2015 or so, a video I may actually unlist since this one will make it completely irrelevant. This video might also set a precedent for me to remake some videos on old cards that could use a bit of an update, or maybe on ones that I don't agree with as much anymore. We'll see. Either way, the face of rank 7's once upon a time, Dracossack saw play right out of the gate. Because Lord of the Tachyon Galaxy gave us the game's second Tier 0 format, or close enough to one because the Dragon Rulers were very much ahead of their time on release. Having an effect in the hand, in the grave, and when banished, on top of just being beaters on the field, it allowed players to make plays wherever they put the dragons. The search effects when banished meant they could keep up resources to keep getting dragons out. The effects in hand could deal with cards in a number of ways, either by popping cards on the field or reviving monsters from their own graveyard, and the ability to summon them from either the hand or the grave by banishing 2 dragons or cards of matching attributes was as easy as it could be. And since the rulers bounced to hand if they were special summoned at the opponent's end phase, you were essentially encouraged to overlay them, and Dracossack was as good as it got at the time. The ability to summon out tokens could allow the player to tribute summon Light and Darkness Dragon or even just another ruler, because it's not like the deck was using its normal summons, and if you weren't feeling in the mood to do that, you could simply tribute one of the tokens away to clear a problem card. I personally remember hating dealing with Dracossack at the time that was just sitting beside 2 tokens, because you'd need to clear 3 monsters ultimately just to get rid of what was 1. And if you didn't manage to do that, they could just summon back 2 more tokens and pop more of your cards on the following turn. The tokens also saw their use as synchro material as the format would change, with Debris Dragon serving as a great tuner for the deck to make Ancient Fairy Dragon, another level 7 that could not only get Dragon Ruler players access to more copies of Ravine to abuse, but also it was an extra monster to banish to summon rulers from the grave or hand, and it was a level 7 itself, meaning it wasn't uncommon to make a Dracossack using Ancient Fairy Dragon. But regardless of whether players wanted the tokens as synchro material for more dragons, or just simply as walls to end on or means to pop cards with Dracossack, it didn't matter because multiple copies of Dracossack were in just about every Dragon Ruler deck the vast majority of the time. It is worth noting that Dragon Rulers weren't the only deck playing Dracossack during this time, as Spellbook, the Dragon Ruler's only real contender in the format, would also occasionally play the plane. It was never the main goal of the deck. That was always going to be Spellbook of Judgment to gain insane advantage for 2013, on top of getting out the floodgate that is Jauga the Spiritualist, a card that didn't allow either player to special summon, because the goal of Spellbook decks is ultimately to not allow fun to happen. But if they weren't doing that, and they played 2 copies of High Priestess of Prophecy, that was 2 level 7s, which meant they could go into the sack as a backup plan if they wanted to. That wasn't common, but it's not like the deck was tight on extract space, so I think the general consensus was, why not? And then there's the fact that there were other decks that could access level 7s in the post-ruler Tier 0 era. The previous meta threat that had been Mermail was playing the card as well. Mermail have a number of level 7 monsters with easy summoning conditions in Abyss Megalo and Abysdius, not to mention they have a copy of Abyss Lind, which could summon out Abyss Lead, which is a whole lot of Abyss names, but long story story short, they had a lot of level 7s, and if they didn't want to use them as beaters, they were great as Xyz material. And while that deck would often make their in-theme Abyss Gaios, which was a blanket monster negate, Dracossack was a great way to help clear boards for whatever the deck couldn't get rid of using the Atlantean monster effects. Similarly, Harpy was a deck that had become a solid option to play in 2014, and while it was never the best deck, it did have some access to strong tools. Hysteric Party served as a soul charge for the deck before other decks got access to actual soul charge, and being winged beasts meant that the deck had access to rank 4 plays that most others didn't, namely Lightning, Chidori, and Ice Beast Zero Fine to pick apart boards and just negate every card on the field, because Zero Fine's, I guess, just kinda nutty for no reason. But most importantly for this video, Harpy had received a new monster in Channeler that could not only summon a monster from the deck for a quick Xyz, but Channeler itself would become level 7 if you controlled a dragon type monster. This meant that the deck could play a copy of Tempest, the Dragon Ruler, to make easy rank 7 plays, and one of the best ones at the time was again Dracossack. And because comedy is king, the intended use of the effect of Channeler to become level 7 with a dragon on board was with a copy of Harpy's Pet Dragon that Channeler could summon from the deck. However, because Harpy's Pet Dragon was only a promotional card from the Forbidden Memories for the Game Boy Advance, I believe it was, that was its only printing, Harpy's Pet Dragon became like a $120 card if I remember correctly. Gotta love the secondhand market. Of course, there's also Gear Curry, a deck that felt right out of 2023 almost, just being played in 2014, able to abuse the Curry engine's battle position changing effects to really plus with Gear Armor's search effect, and swarm the field with powerful synchro and Xyz plays. A common end board would include a Dracossack made using 2 copies of Bure and something like Stardust Dragon, and in a perfect world, some lovely trap cards as well, like a Solemn Judgment. And one of the last cards to come onto the scene in what was the hat format would be Sylvan, a plant deck ripe to abuse the then being unused Lone Fire Blossom. This was able to swarm boards with ease, and through the ability to stack the deck, it was able to make some very solid pluses. Among the best cards in the deck were Princess Sprout, who could manipulate its level if excavated from the deck to the graveyard, and Sejakoya, a level 7 that could summon itself if a plant type was excavated and sent to the graveyard, and who could itself excavate a plant and send it to the graveyard. These two especially would give the deck the easiest access to rank 7 plays, and when the deck didn't want or need to go into its mass bounce Oreo. Either way, when it wasn't making the bird, Dracossack was a great way to wall up a little bit or otherwise destroy a card that you weren't able to bounce. I'll also give mention to Lightsworn Rulers because this was a crazy strong deck that abused Lightsworn's ability to mill, along with Dragon Ruler's utility in the grave to make some crazy plays. Lightsworn's milling could send cards like Eclipse Wyvern to the grave, which would then allow you to banish it to summon out rulers, which by proxy would mean you could search power cards like Judgment Dragon or Lightright Diablos, and with these self-summoning beaters you could make very quick OTKs, and if you couldn't seal out the game, ending on a walled up Dracossack with the threat to do it all again the next turn was a pretty solid play back in 2014. The fall of the hat format, or more accurately, the rise of the Duelist Alliance format, would see Dracossack fall from prominence. It does show up in some number of Qliphort decks at that time, although if it was ever even summoned like 4 times total, I would be shocked. The Qliphort scales lock you into only summoning Qli monsters, and the only level 7 the deck ever really played was Qliphort Disc. So you'd need to have 2 of them, and that wasn't going to be happening all too often. It was still there, and if they did summon it out, it's worth noting Dracossack could tribute itself under the conditions of skill drain to allow you to pop a card and disrupt an opponent's board, because Dracossack will be in the graveyard and no longer face up on the field to be negated by skill drain, which is neat, and I suppose the reason to play it, but again, if you had scales, you weren't really doing much other than Qli beats. Infernoid, on the other hand, was another deck in the Duelist Alliance era that would play Dracossack, although again, it's really not the primary play. Infernoids all have the condition that they cannot be summoned if the total level or ranks of all monsters you control is 9 or higher. They needed to be 8 or lower to even summon themselves. As such, they were fond of monsters that could either leave the field or didn't have effects. Psyframe Lord Omega was a popular choice in this deck for its obvious synergies, being able to recover the banished Infernoids and leave the field, but the sack could remove itself again to clear cards, much like it had been doing in Qliphort. all 4 times. This allowed Infernoid players to then summon out their Infernoids further after having disrupted the board, and since the tokens don't actually count as effect monsters, the Infernoids could keep them on field to tribute to use their DD Crow effects. I don't think this was very common, but it is like a cute incidental synergy, so yeah, it did see play. Cosmo also joins the list of decks that played this card with little intention of summoning it. The main goal of Cosmo is to swing for game and abuse Farm Girl's search, then tag out to summon a bigger beater to swing again. Forerunner is a level 7 with 2800 attack that the deck would end on in the earliest instances of the deck, and if the player had 2 of them on board, they could opt to overlay to give them some additional removal, especially in the first wave of Cosmo support before the deck had Dark Destroyer. Dracossack was always in competition with Forerunner, just being on the board anyways though, because Forerunner would float, so it was often, just keep out the Forerunner. Still, even if players opted to keep Forerunner on the board, Dracossack would remain in the extra deck because this was another deck with a very loose extra, and it's better to have and not need than need and not have. After this, it fell out of the metagame for a good while. It might have showed up in the odd Mermail or Infernoid deck list that topped, and Dark Spiral is apparently a deck that played it since the deck could make Ancient Fairy Dragon with Destrudo to get its main plan going, and Master Plan's a level 7, and it's got a once per turn on the search for the field spell, so it's like if you end up getting another one out, you can maybe overlay them to make Dracossack. Generally, they'd probably rather go into number 42 Galaxy Tomahawk for the most link spam possible, but going second, the same sort of play could be made with Draco to summon out tokens for more link spam, or maybe use its tribute effect to help clear boards. Again, this felt like more of a niche tech than any sort of main game plan like the card had been used for once upon a time in the Rulers. Dracossack's next big time to shine in the meta would come in 2023 with Kashtira, a deck of level 7 spams that would do a whole lot of things that very few people enjoyed. Kashtira would abuse banishing cards face down as just like an absurdly good way to disrupt the opponent's board, a boss monster that serves as a macrocosmos on legs, and most fun of all, a card that could lock out zones entirely. And while Zone Lock Turbo was a nice bonus, it was the disruptions and endless banishing that were the most common plays for the deck. Cash is a deck that can make rank 7 plays with ease and often even locks themselves into only making these plays if they happen to use Theosis during the turn. This meant decks often played the best generic rank 7s in the game, and Dracossack and its oldest companion Big Eye were very common in lists. Dracossack played the same role it had for years now, being summoned out to tribute itself to pop a face-up skill drain when a Cash player faced the inevitable Labyrinth matchup. A simple but effective role. It did also show up in some truly gamer-minded lists, such as in Adventure Kashtira, which would use the token summoned by Dracossack to link into Cherubini to send a copy of Water Enchantress to the graveyard, and then banish Water Enchantress to search outright and get the full adventure line going, although this was not all that popular of a build for the deck, and it definitely wasn't what Kashtira was known for. There's also, of course, the honorary mention for the combo of Tier Limit players. I don't know that this ever topped, but after Tier Limits got massively slaughtered on a ban list in 2023, it was noted that in the OCG, and some players I guess wanted to emulate in the TCG, to use the same sort of play that Adventure Cash had been doing, by using Kashtira monsters to make a copy of Dracossack and use Dracossack's tokens to make Cherubini. They could send a copy of King of the Swamp to the graveyard and then link off Cherubini and Dracossack to make Sprite Sprind, which would send a copy of Merly from deck to grave, which meant you could shuffle in Merly and King of the Swamp to get your Tier Limit plays going. This has yet to see serious play in the TCG as I'm making this video, but some people refuse to let things die, and this is such a commitment to playing Tier that I felt the need to mention it, because first hearing it, it was like, good god, please just let it die. Dracossack's indeed one. It's never seen the heights of play that it saw on its initial release, in no small part due to the general power creep of the game. In 2013, big threats had been cards like Firefist Bear, or a copy of Atlantean Marksman in a Mermail deck, or Grapha in Dark World, and things like that. Single target destruction was the most prevalent form of removal, and Dracossack's immunity to that while you had tokens was very effective at the time, or it felt so to me. But as time passed and cards like Honor Arc and Castel became more commonplace, its general power fell. Initially, I recall Dracossack being a good wall to make when going first, but by the time Duelist Alliance dropped, it became much more of a pop one card than it was a wall. During hat format, it was a solid way to help pick apart a board, and as time went on, it would become interesting as a tech for link decks, turning any 2 level 7 monsters into 3 monsters in terms of link climbing. Nothing insane, but nothing to scoff at either, because taking 2 level 7s and making it into 3 monsters instead of 2 is just a straight +1, or alternatively, summoning the 2 tokens, tributing one of them to pop a card, and then still have 2 monsters, it's still some solid advantage. It's a card with a lot more versatility than it might initially seem, even if it can't attack if you want to keep it around after using its destruction effect. Overall, Dracossack is a titan of a bygone era, part of the face of one of the most infamous Tier 0 formats, or close enough to Tier 0. It was a powerhouse of the game, right up until the game-warping power creep of Duelist Alliance. And even after that, the ability for it to allow players to play around floodgates by simply tributing itself, and its summoning of bodies to use for further summons such as Synchro or Links or even tributes, made it a card with strong versatility and a pretty damn cool legacy. It's still to this day a great option as a rank 7 toolbox spot, and the plane that it was based on has sadly been destroyed, which means we're all obligated to play it and honor that beautiful chunk of metal. And so that's our look at Yu-Gi-Oh! Single card history, Mecha Phantom Beast Dracossack. Stay tuned for our next video, and feel free to suggest some cards to review or what type of video you'd like to see. Don't forget to like, and as always, subscribe to YGO Strats to impress your smoking Italian wife, and so you too can be a true duelist.